better, but me, your man, Louie T. Welcome to this Louie T Network exclusive recapping of the Hard Knocks series featuring the New York Jets. This is something that I used to do every year for Hard Knocks. I stopped because the series sort of lost some of its luster, and I had other endeavors. But I've got a little bit more time on my hands, and this is a really big, to me, season of Hard Knocks because the team in question legitimately has a shot to win a Super Bowl. And you generally don't get that on Hard Knocks because, as we know, if you're on Hard Knocks, you're on there for a reason. You either didn't make the playoffs last year, which the Jets didn't. You got a new head coach, the Jets don't. Or you've been on the show in the last decade, and apparently the Jets haven't. I think 2010 might have been the last time they were on Hard Knocks. So, generally speaking, you don't get teams that have Super Bowl aspirations on the Hard Knocks series. Case in point, last year, the Detroit Lions, right? So, that's what makes, I think, this year's Hard Knocks so compelling, is because getting Aaron Rodgers on board and what that means to what I feel like is a loaded roster, and we'll talk about that more as we get into this recap, gives this particular season, I think, a little bit more credence. Like, it gives this particular Hard Knocks season a lot more luster that I felt like it had lost over, the last few years or so. But in any event, episode 1 was entertaining. I enjoyed it. And I made a list of 7 items. You know how I get when I get listy, I start listing things, and my lists are usually comprised of 7 items. So from here on out, you should expect a recap of each of these episodes, and it'll be attached to 7 items or takeaways that I got from that particular episode. Before we get to the 7 takeaways, I want to talk about some honorable mentions. Some segments or some particular scenes from the episode that are worth mentioning that didn't make the list, but for one reason or another, I felt it was only right to bring it up. So the first thing that I noticed watching this episode was Aaron Rodgers was made to feel comfortable. We talked about this in the offseason, but just enforcing that point, hammering it home, seeing Randall Cobb sitting in front of him during the team meeting, seeing him do a handshake, and he had several, but one in particular with his former Packers teammate, wide receiver Alan Lazard, and, seeing his former quarterbacks coach in Green Bay, now the offensive coordinator, former Denver Broncos head coach Nathaniel Hackett there, it all screams making Aaron Rodgers feel comfortable. And again, if you wanted him to come there, if you wanted him to take the massive pay cut that he took to play for the Jets, you needed to make him feel comfortable. And they did that this offseason. So that's something that I felt like was worth a mention. They were playing the pylon game, and, different aspects of camp. We saw this with the Cowboys a couple of years ago when they were doing the joint practices with the Chargers, and they were having the little contest where they were trying to hit items far away, things of that nature. There's always things you can do to make camp light, right? Every team does it. And so the quarterbacks and Nathaniel Hackett were all playing the pylon game, and it was funny because Rodgers said that it was somewhat inspired by, basketball. They were doing the little jabs. When you go to shooting basketball, if you've ever seen the movie, they would scream out something that was outrageous that was supposed to be aimed at making you miss the shot. So they were doing that, and I couldn't help myself but laugh when Nathaniel Hackett was throwing the ball, and I want to say it was Rodgers, but somebody screamed out, Sean Payton. I think it was Aaron Rodgers. That was savage, is what that was. That was really funny. So I enjoyed that. But the part that was the funniest of the entire episode didn't make the top 7 list because it wasn't important in the grand scheme of things, but it was too damn funny not to mention, was when the defensive linemen were talking. Solomon Thomas was talking to Tanzil Smart. He was talking to another defensive lineman. I didn't know who it was, and then the guy that they got from the Rams, I think a couple of off seasons ago. John, I think it's John Franklin Myers or John Myers Franklin, something to that effect. Anyway, he was talking about, taking them to a Broadway show and all kinds of stuff. And Tanzil Smart trying to be, you always get one person who tries to be in their in their intellectual bag, if you will, and just can't seem to get right. And so he meant to say charcuterie board, right? But he called it a Car-Coochie board. What the hell is a Car-Coochie board? So that right there was one of those moments where you had to rewind it 2 or 3 times. And I was watching it with my wife, and I was like, did he say what I think he just said? And she was like, yeah, I think he did. I was like, did he try to say charcuterie? He did. He did try to say charcuterie, and it didn't quite come out the way that he had intended it to. A Car-Coochie board. Oh, man, that's good stuff. So, let's get into the list, man. Those were all honorable mentions from the first episode. Let's get into the list of the 7 items, the takeaways from episode number 1. Number 7, Liev Schreiber, who is the narrator and has been for every season except one of Hard Knocks, who is also known as the voice of God, showed up at training camp. And I'm assuming this is by design for Aaron Rodgers because he's a big fan. And Rodgers sort of fanboyed, when he showed up. He came in a chopper. It was all dramatic. And Rodgers ended up talking to him towards the end of practice. But it was funny because when Rodgers talked to him, he kind of was getting on other players and coaches to go talk to him, almost trying to bully them into going and talking to him. Do you know who that is? And, half of those guys don't even know who he is, right? But it was just funny to see Rodgers kind of fanboying over Liev Schreiber, which we know his voice is legendary. It's got one of those voices that's similar to Morgan Freeman, or James Earl Jones, right? Anyway, I digress. That was number 7. Number 6, the Jets have embraced Hard Knocks after being reluctant to be on the show. And I get it. That one's a pretty simple one. What choice did they have? Once you already realize what's going on here, what's at work, you just need to kind of fall in line, and they have. But, they could have still been reluctant. They could have still been kind of standoffish, and they're not doing it. Their head coach didn't want any parts of it. But now that they're here, he's embraced it, and he's like, hey, we're going to make the best of this situation, and that's what they're doing. And I think that's the smart thing to do. Don't push back. Just lean in, right? Just lean in and just go about business the way you normally would and try to ignore the cameras. It may be hard, but from listening to other teams that have been on Hard Knocks, you really don't notice the cameras because they try to do as good a job as they can of kind of staying out of the way and being as innocuous as they can. So I think the Jets, after being reluctant, have really embraced it, especially Aaron Rodgers. I think Robert Saleh and Aaron Rodgers in particular have really embraced this opportunity. And you know what? For Rodgers, I think that's big because there's this narrative out there about Aaron Rodgers as a teammate. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later on as we get deeper into this recap of this episode. So that's number 6. The Jets have embraced Hard Knocks after being initially reluctant to be on the show. Number 5. This is a big one, and this was one of the storylines for me. And I want to see if they continue with this storyline or not. I assume during these preseason games, this will be one of the storylines that they'll continue to pursue, and I think it is one that is mandatory, if you ask me. And that's Zach Wilson's career. And I think, number 5, Zach Wilson's career has hit a 2-year pause, right? It could have been over in New York. And it still may be over. Who knows? We'll see how he continues to develop under Aaron Rodgers. But honestly, this is the best thing that could have happened to him. After the disaster that was last year, he really was on his way out of New York. And Aaron Rodgers coming in, kind of taking him under his wing. And because we all know Zach Wilson is super talented. So that's not the issue. You know, they showed him throwing the no-look passes. Rodgers, like, if you want to know who's been, just as, good at the no-look passes in camp as I have been, is Zach Wilson. Like, he's got this thing, down pat. And he's got that kind of a skill set. But it's about him putting the mental side of things together along with the physical traits that he's been blessed with in order to become a better quarterback. And Aaron Rodgers being there, taking him under his wing, and giving him that tutelage that maybe he lacked when he first got to New York is, I think, such a vital tool for him moving forward. And honestly, after these 2 years are up, whatever Rodgers decides to do, the Jets will have a decision to make if Rodgers, makes it complicated and doesn't necessarily want to retire. But after these 2 years are up, he's going to be at a crossroads of his career because he's getting a new lease on life with Aaron Rodgers being there, with Nathaniel Hackett coming there and working closely with him. He's getting a new lease on life. What he does with this opportunity is up to him, and I'm honestly looking forward to seeing what he does with this opportunity. Because he doesn't have to be a career backup or a journeyman quarterback, sort of like Sam Darnold has morphed into. Like, he doesn't have to be like that, like the last Jets first-round pick quarterback that was taken in the top 5 was. He can actually make something of his career, but he's going to have to take full advantage of this 2-year pause that Aaron Rodgers is providing him with to get his shit together. And that's one of the first things you notice watching this particular episode. And I hope they continue to follow that storyline as they get into this series even further. That's number 5, that Zach Wilson's career has hit a 2-year pause. And it's essentially going to be at a crossroads. Number 4, I think one of the long shots that they're going to follow in the series is linebacker Chaz Surratt. So generally they follow 1 or 2 guys that are long shots to make the roster. And like last year, Malcolm Rodriguez was a late round draft pick at linebacker that they followed, and he became this overnight sensation, essentially. How he played, this, that, and the third. And every year they grab a guy that has no business making a team and turn him into a sympathetic figure that you're rooting for. I don't know if Chaz Surratt necessarily fits that bill. This guy was a 3rd-round pick by the Minnesota Vikings. I remember really liking him coming out of UNC as a 3rd-round pick. He made the transition from quarterback to linebacker. He was extremely raw, but he had all the physical traits. And for whatever reason, it didn't work in Minnesota. They cut him. The Jets picked him up. He was on their practice squad last year. So it doesn't quite feel like the normal undrafted underdog story, but he didn't make the Jets roster last year. Obviously, they got their hands on him a little too late for that. I think he's going to make their roster this year, but we'll see. But just the little tidbits that they gave us. He had a pick in the Hall of Fame game. They showed head coach Robert Saleh talking about him multiple times during the show. It makes me feel like they're going to follow Chaz Surratt around, and maybe he be one of those guys that's a long shot to make the roster that they're going to follow. We'll see. But that's number 4. I think Chaz Surratt is going to end up being one of the long shot players that they follow this particular season. Number 3, for a guy like Garrett Wilson, Rodgers' presence could be a gift and a curse. And he was driving in the whip, was Garrett Wilson, and he was talking about the impact of Aaron Rodgers coming on board and how there's a window there and he doesn't know how long he's going to be there, but they got to take advantage of this opportunity. And I remember looking at my wife, I turned to my wife and I said, I feel bad for Garrett Wilson. And she's like, why? What do you mean? I said, because this is a gift and a curse. Last year, he experienced what it's like to have poor quarterback play. Some of the worst, And it's frustrating as a receiver, especially when you come from Ohio State, you're having all this success, and then you come to the NFL, and then you get a dud at the quarterback position, and you struggle. It's frustrating. He was Rookie of the Year offensively, so he still took care of business, but they lost games. They left some opportunities on the field that if they had better quarterback play, they could have, maybe taken advantage of, probably made the playoffs. That said, Rodgers comes on board, and he's going to be exposed to the highest levels of quarterback play possible in the NFL And where do you go from there, right? It's like playing with a Hall of Fame quarterback your first 2 or 3 years of your career. That guy retires, and now you just go through bum ass quarterback after bum ass quarterback. It's tough because you know how it's supposed to look. You know how it's supposed to be run. You know how this is supposed to go because you've seen it at the highest levels, and now you're being, exposed to quarterbacks that can't even come close, can't even hold a candle to Aaron Rodgers. The good thing is he was exposed to what life without a quarterback was like in his rookie season. Now he's gonna have the exposure of playing with the best of the best, but then going back from that is gonna be tough. It's like living in a mansion and then being sent to go live in the hood, right? You went from 20,000 square foot to 412. That's what the equivalent of playing with Rodgers for these next 2 years and then potentially going. Now, he could get lucky and, Zach Wilson could get his shit together, or they could find another guy that comes in that's really good and the drop off is slight, but it's still really good or competent quarterback play. But it's terrible when you go from that kind of play, like Larry Fitzgerald going from Carson Palmer and Kurt Warner to all the other shit that he dealt with. Like, that's tough, right? That's tough. It's hard to kind of have your brain wrap itself around. And we saw how Garrett Wilson was acting up last year when the quarterback play wasn't good. So it's going to be a gift because now he's going to see what it's supposed to look like at the NFL level, and the ball is going to be right where it's supposed to be, and it's going to make his life so much easier. It could be a curse, though, because he can get used to this, have it snatched away from him, and now, like, you're never getting back to that level again. And that's a frustrating thing. We'll see what happens. Anyway, I just thought about that watching him driving in the whip. Number 2, the Jets are loaded, man. Watching this thing reminds me of why I felt like Rodgers in New York was a great fit. They got a ton of talent on that football team. From Sauce Gardner, watching him go one-on-one with Garrett Wilson and iron sharpens iron. Quinnen Williams on that defensive line, C.J. Mosley at the linebacker position. They just got talent all over the place, man. That's a team that if they don't win and win big, make the playoffs, make some noise, I'm going to be shocked. If they're healthy, obviously health is the biggest key. But their offensive line, they've spent resources on the offensive line. They've got a big group in front of Rodgers. He should be fine back there. The D-line, they've spent resources on that. It's a good group. Solid group of linebackers, including Quinnen Williams' brother, who flies around the field and hits anything that's moving like a heat-seeking missile. The back end, DJ Reed and, Sauce Gardner, and they've got so much talent. Offensively, adding all the weapons they added this offseason, not to mention already still having Corey Davis and Garrett Wilson, who are holdovers from last year. This team is, and I don't know if they're looking to upgrade running back. If Breece Hall is healthy, they don't even have to do anything there, right? Once he gets healthy, he gets right again. But they're loaded, man. The Jets are loaded. That's number 2. And that leads me right into number 1. This older, wiser Aaron Rodgers is great for this Jets team. And he makes them a Super Bowl contender. And you can see how it permeates the building. It gives everybody confidence. Jeff Albrecht, who is the defensive coordinator, is talking to the defense, and they gave up a play in practice, and he's like, look, there's only one guy on the planet that can make this throw right here, okay? Like, understand, this is some goddamn, this is some damn good defense right here. And that's just a better ball. And guess what? He plays for our team. Like, we don't have to defend this guy during the regular season, okay? He's on our side. Jack Del Rio said that when they got Peyton Manning in Denver, he was the defensive coordinator there. The year before, they were going through the motions at the quarterback position. The defense was really good, but they were struggling everywhere else on the offensive side because they didn't have a quarterback. And they got Peyton Manning, and it changed everything in Denver. And obviously, they went to the Super Bowl, got their doors blown off, and then they went back and won it. Coincidentally enough, they ended up winning it when Manning was a shell of himself. But when he first got there, and I think it was 2013 when Manning got to Denver, remember he set all those records? And they went to the Super Bowl. And he's like, yo, it changed everything. Everyone in the building knew we got a shot because we got the sheriff. Everybody in that building knows we got a shot because we got A-Rod. So, and I think this whole Hard Knocks is showing a different side of Aaron Rodgers, painting him in a different light because, he had some teammates that had some not so flattering things to say about him and his leadership style and all that. And it may have been true. Back in the day, Aaron Rodgers, he learned from Brett Favre, who was, known to be an ass at times. And we've seen some of the shit he's done off the field, so we know Brett Favre isn't the cleanest character. And, Aaron Rodgers, I think, was affected by a little bit of that. But now as you get older, and we saw it with Kobe, we saw it with Tom Brady, guys that were hyper competitive, but as they got older, later in their careers, they were sharing advice. They were more willing to be a better teammate. And not to say that they were assholes as teammates. In the case of Kobe, maybe he was, but it was because he was trying to make guys better, hold them to a higher standard. But as he got, later into the game, longer in the tooth, he started sharing some of the knowledge. Started really being, that wily veteran that can impart knowledge on the young players, and you're seeing that from Rodgers. And I think this is going to paint him in a much better light. And you know what it also did for me? It reinforced why I always felt like Rodgers was the best quarterback I've ever seen. But it's the lack of Super Bowls, and it's not his fault, that they don't get it done. But you see Aaron Rodgers, you're like, there's no way he should only have one Super Bowl. There's no way Eli Manning should have more Super Bowl rings than him. Aaron Rodgers has been to the NFC Championship game like 5 or 6 times, and he's only been to the Super Bowl once. That shit is crazy to me. Watching him and seeing how great he is and just reminding myself of all the off-platform throws, how tight of a spiral, the velocity, how accurate he is. Doesn't matter if he's standing on 2 feet, throwing off a 1, how accurate he is. They showed a couple of clips of him just throwing a football. He threw it into a bucket that was way down the field, and he just launches it and it just drops in the bucket. They're doing the little accuracy drills, and he just throws it right into the little net, the little, red and blue nets. Whoop, whoop. And I just keep telling myself, man, this dude is phenomenal. Only one Super Bowl. You want to change the narrative. If you're Aaron Rodgers, this is the opportunity to do it. Get that second Super Bowl ring and put yourself in a whole different category, whole different discussion. He'll never be better than Brady. There's not enough hardware there. He won't be better than, Manning or some of those guys, but you get that second ring, and now you're right there with Manning. You're right there with both of the Mannings, but Peyton Manning in particular. Now we can have a conversation. Anyway, I digress. I thought episode 1 was good. Looking forward to see what direction they take in episode number 2, and I'll be back with a recap after next Tuesday's episode. So that's going to do it for me, your man Louie T, here on this Louie T Network exclusive New York Jets Hard Knocks recap from episode number 1. I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one. Louie T.